There were people who had attitudes about Harry. It must be inferior because he's black. We have to accept that as historic fact. And obviously, it has been quite successful because most of the people who come into the hospital leave the hospital, and they don't leave in an ambulance. What is amazing to me is that the caring part that Harry has always had and still does, the caring part, the lay public seems to not care about it unless they have a relative who has come through the system.
Today's PSAs from Dr. Henry Moses, a revered and transformative figure who has been a cornerstone of Meharry for more than 60 years. His unwavering dedication and profound influence have shaped countless lives as he supports Meharry students in their pursuit of becoming healthcare professionals. My name is Dr. James Hildreth, and you're listening to Public Service Announcement. To learn more about this show, or to learn more about Meharry Medical College, visit www.mmc.edu. Dr. Moses, what a great honor for me to have you on the podcast. Can you share with our listeners a little bit about your childhood and how you became interested in research and finally made your way to Meharry as a professor?
Well, that's a very good and interesting question. One of my brothers, there were 6 of us. Our mother passed away shortly after I was born. But one of the brothers took a special interest in me, and he would ask me a lot of questions. And a little later on, he said, I wanted to see about your curiosity. He's one of my very favorite brothers. He's passed now. Mm-hmm. But I would take hopper grasses, or grasshoppers, whatever you call them, and pull the legs off and study them and ask them, how does it get to this? How did they get this? What do they use this for? So one summer, he sold some seeds, vegetable and flower seeds, offered by Lancaster Seed Company out of Pennsylvania. And he used some of the money he made to buy me a microscope. It was just a little thing and he said, this will enlarge what you're seeing. Mm-hmm. And I really appreciated that. And I think that stimulated my interest in the sciences. And later on, I went to Livingstone College in Salisbury, North Carolina. The brother's name was Andrew. And I was fascinated because so many people talked about chemistry was so tough at Livingstone. And since they said how tough it was, I decided I was going to take it. Okay. And that really stimulated my interest. And my professor, the head of the chemistry department, said, you want to do graduate studies there? And he sent me to Purdue. And that is where I did my PhD. And I met a professor in protein biochemistry who was a compatriot of Harold Dadford West. Mm-hmm. And what Dr. West had started the biochemistry department here at Meharry. Dr. West and I were fellow graduate students at the University of Illinois. And when Dr. West decided on his thesis research, our professor said to him, I want you to identify and synthesize the isomeric form of L-threonine. And the thing is that it has 4 isomeric forms, but only one of them would work. Nobody had been able to synthesize it. Professor Mertz, bless his heart, said, I believe that Professor Rose, our chair, had given that assignment to Dr. West because he couldn't do it. Mm. Well, it turns out that Dr. West did synthesize it, and it worked. Mm. So he had to give him his PhD degree.
Wow. So Dr. Moses, when you were doing your PhD at Purdue, there weren't very many African Americans doing graduate studies, period, toward a PhD. What was that like?
Well, different people behave differently. I cannot say that all of them were nice and kind, because some of them were mean and hateful. However, I was assigned with a laboratory operated by Herbert Parker. Mm-hmm. Herbert Parker knew about Meharry because he was from Paris, Tennessee, and I was in his laboratory. And he was very kind. He and his wife had 3 boys, and frequently I would babysit those boys.
Oh, wow.
We developed a very good friendship, and not all the people were as kind as he was. Mm. It was alleged that there were 3 of us in the Department of Biochemistry. Dr. Sidney McNary, you know him.
Yes.
He was my roommate there.
Oh,
and
wow.
Dr. Joseph Labatt. Mm-hmm. Joseph Labatt said, I cannot handle these white folks. You and Sidney can stay, but I'm leaving. Mm. So he came to Meharry, and he became a surgeon practicing in New Orleans, Louisiana.
Oh, wow.
When it was time for me to graduate, he said to Dr. West and Dr. Edward High, we need a biochemist at Meharry. So they sent Dr. West. He and Edward High sent Dr. Labatt up to Purdue to convince me to consider Meharry as I was getting ready to leave. Mm-hmm. And so Joe Labatt is really the reason that I came. It turns out that the people who stayed here really had lived up and followed the mission of Meharry Medical College.
So, having been here since 1964, which is 6 decades, you must have some amazing, memorable experiences. Can you just share what you feel are your most memorable experiences over those 6 decades?
Well, that's a tough one because there are several. But the one that I would say visits with me every now and then is when I first came here, Dr. and Mrs. West invited me to come to their home for a meal. Mm-hmm. I lived in Lytle Hall because I didn't have any place else to live. But I remember Dr. West saying to me, where are you going to church? And I said, well, I'll have to scout around and find one. He said, I think you're coming to church at Clark Memorial United Methodist Church, because that's where we go, and we will pick you up. So I was ready. They picked me up. And Mrs. West had these huge hats that she wore. And I looked around, and I said, now, there's nobody sitting behind her. And later on, Miss Vivian Fielder said, no, nobody sits behind her, because if you want to see the preacher, you can't sit behind her. But Mrs. West was on one side, I was in the middle, Dr. West was on the other side. And I was so impressed, even with the people in the church. They were so welcoming. Mm-hmm. I liked it very much. So that probably is one of the top experiences that I have had. One other experience that ranks also high with me is Dr. West said, at Meharry, we have to do several things. That's why I still teach some lectures in biochemistry and try to run Meharry. Mm-hmm. Are you up to it? I said, of course. Whatever you say, I will do. So what happened is he assigned me to look at all of the things that was a deficit at Meharry, and you make sure that they're not anymore a deficit. Mm-hmm. So I got involved in all kinds of things here. Mm. One of the first newsletters, we called it the Meharry Week. One of my work study students and I used to hand deliver it.
Oh, wow.
But it was good for me to do that because I learned a lot about all of the areas at the institution. So that was an outstanding thing. And when it was time for the admissions committee of the School of Medicine to be upgraded, he asked me if I would do it. And I said I was glad to do it. There was some professors here who said, it's a conflict of interest. If he's doing things in admissions and he's also doing things in recruiting. And Dr. West, I remember, said to him, there's no conflict of interest. These are jobs that need to be done, and you didn't do it.
Oh, wow. I've heard stories about Dr. West. That sounds very much like him.
I remember when the first white students were admitted, they were junior students when I came, in the School of Medicine and one in the School of Dentistry. As the one in the School of Medicine did not marry and went to Anchorage, Alaska, and then he ended up in Fairbanks, Alaska. But the one in the School of Dentistry had a legacy with Meharry in that he had both a son and a daughter to finish the dental school at Meharry.
Oh, wow.
And Gorman was the name. And they are good graduates, But the dedication that Meharians had, those who stayed. Now, there were some people who came here because this was a good hunting ground so they could search for other jobs, and they left. There are many left, and they've done it all over the years, as I recall. But there are some people who really feel the mission. They're dedicated. It's almost like they feel it was a godsend. And I picked up on that, and I liked it. I liked it very much.
So, having been at Meharry so long, I mean, the school is 148 years old, so you've been around for about 45% of the whole life of the college, which is just amazing. Not only have you had a profound impact here at Meharry, but also at Fisk, which is right across the street from Meharry, of course. So how did that come about that you got involved in the faculty at Fisk?
Well, Fisk has always been at the forefront for education for Black people, and now for everybody who will come. It turns out that Fisk wanted to have the students have a course in biochemistry, and nobody would teach it. So Dr. I. Wesley Elliott, who's from Kansas, asked me if I would teach it. I said yes. When I started teaching that course at Fisk, Bradley Shears was one of my early students. As a matter of fact, he is the first, though he and Priscilla Evans argue about who was first. But anyway, they both were students. Bradley entered my class, and he said, along with several others there, I'm tired. I worked hard at this. I'm going to cruise the second semester. The first examination that I gave him, he made a D. And he argued, said, well, it could have been a C minus. I said, but it was a D. And I said, you're going to get a C or less if you don't straighten up. He finally decided, I talked to his father, that he was going to straighten up. And I said, okay, if you're going to straighten up, I will recommend you to go to Purdue. I knew how brilliant that fellow was. And he is still. I think somebody said that he sold whatever interest he had in the pharmaceutical firm where he was working for $80 million. And I said to him, don't forget Fisk. And he has not forgotten Fisk.
Wonderful.
He has not forgotten Fisk. He established a scholarship in my name at Purdue, which was his PhD student. And he went to MIT with the Harvard MIT program.
Yes.
And that's where somebody used to teach him, said, you study STOTs. He said, well, I study mucoproteins. And if you call it STOTs, just remember, I study mucoproteins. Great guy.
Wow.
So the money has grown. It has grown because I have never used it. I've tried to get some of my colleagues at Meharry to invest, and it turns out that every time they got about $10,000, they got a new car. I didn't get a new car.
I think you're a great example especially for young people who, if they would start investing while they're young, have the discipline not to to use it, it can have a really profound effect on your
Well,
financial.
I always say, you don't have to keep up with the Joneses. And if you want to keep up with the Joneses, use your middle name as Jones and keep up with yourself.
I love it, Dr. Moses. So it really does seem that as long as there's going to be a Meharry, Dr. Moses' commitment to students will be a part of our legacy. Why are you so committed to supporting the students?
Well, my minister used to say, I have never seen a trunk loaded with money behind a hearse. So what are you going to do with it?
Mm-hmm.
Pass it on. If you have it, pass it on. And I've said to my few relatives who stay in touch that don't expect a whole lot from me. Don't expect a whole lot from me. Those of you who have tried to do something with yourself and have a commitment to pay it forward. Mm-hmm. If you've done that, I've helped you as much as I can and as much as I'm going to, because I'm helping the people with whom I have had, I hope, great influence. And I hope I have. I rarely have run across a student who has not said thank you. And some of them I have not helped financially, but I have helped otherwise to help, I hope, to make them the kind of persons that they should be. One of the most impressive things that I have experienced recently was I had some friends, their property backed up to Cheekwood, and they were wealthy people. And wealthy people, especially the elderly, can be very lonely. Mm-hmm. And I volunteered to work with a group of senior citizens, and this is how I met them. But she passed away, and this man told me, he said, Henry, you know, I got the feeling that my physician thinks that I've lived long enough. Can you find me a physician who will care for me at least until I pass away? So I decided to ask Harvey Bowles if, since he was my physician, one of the most brilliant, creative students that I have ever taught. I said, you would take a patient. I said, the man is 90. And he said, bring him in. He lived 4.5 more years. They cared for him. Mm-hmm. They really cared for him. Mm-hmm. And he said, I thank you so much. And he thanks his staff. And he thanked Meharry. Every gift that he had given to Meharry, he remains anonymous.
Wow. Clearly, we've had some extraordinary physicians who come out of Meharry with that mindset of serving for the right reasons, and we're really proud of that. And one of the things I really want our listeners to know is that you probably have one of the most amazing memories of anybody I've ever met. And I know at functions we have, like convocations or commencement or galas or whatever, there's always going to be a rush of alums to come and greet you and express their thanks to you for all that you've done for them, even as a mentor or teacher. So what do you attribute this just phenomenal memory to? And how can the rest of us, try to achieve that?
Well, I don't know. I'm not on Prevagen yet.
Okay.
So, or Nervine, whatever the other one is. But I think that much of it is curiosity. Mm-hmm. If a young person develops curiosity, whatever the curiosity is for, it should be nurtured. It should be nurtured. Because if you're curious about something, you will remember. Mm. You will remember it. You may not remember the absolute detail, but you will remember the essence of it. And if you start talking about it, it seems to come back.
Wow. Well, I'll try that. But I think you have a special gift. One of the things that I'm curious about, we're located in North Nashville, and Meharry's not always been as even recognized as widely as it is now, even in our hometown. But you must have seen some really big changes in North Nashville over the time that you've been here. So can you just share a few of those observations with us?
Oh yes. Oh, yes. Meharry has had its low seasons.
Mm-hmm.
There were people who had attitudes about Meharry. The first attitude was, it must be inferior because it's black. We have to accept that as historic fact.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, it has been quite successful because most of the people who come into the hospital leave the hospital and they don't leave in an ambulance. Well, we still have low seasons. One of the reasons is because we went high on research.
Mm-hmm.
And if an institution isn't high on research and can publish, blah, blah, blah was found by such thing, by this. We did the first liver transplant. We did the first liver heart transplant. If you don't have that kind of thing, the lay public will not treat you and respect you with the same things that they respect those who do have it.
Mm-hmm.
What is amazing to me is that the caring part that Meharry has always had and still does, the caring part, the lay public seems to not care about it unless they have a relative who has come through the system.
Right. So looking toward the future, what is your hope for the institution in terms of how we educate students or practice medicine? You have some thoughts about where do we go from here?
Well, I hope that the next president who is hired by the Board of Trustees at Meharry will be as concerned about the future of this institution as you have been and as you have shown and as you have sacrificed.
Well, I when the Board of Trustees hired me, I told them quite sincerely that being president of Maha would be my last job, and give it my best, give it my all. Leaders have responsibilities for both honoring and maintaining the legacy, but also creating a new vision and a new path consistent with who we are and what we are. And that's really all I've tried to do. But a lot of that, Dr. Moses, is shaped by people who've been so committed over many decades to an institution like you've been. And quite honestly, I'd never been to a place where the commitment to an idea, to a mission, was permeating throughout the whole organization. The students, the faculty, the staff. And given how I started out myself, being in a place dedicated to making sure there's health equity for those who really need it was very appealing to me. And I came because of what Meharry is and what it stands for. So the way I like to close these conversations is by asking if there's something that you might frame as a call to action you would like our listeners to know about what they can do to support education or the training of future physicians or, to improve the health of our communities. Do you have a call to action you'd like to share with our listeners?
I'd like to share, give. Make giving your legacy. Make giving your legacy. The accountability and physical affairs of this institution is solid. You don't have to worry about what will happen to if I give. If you want to designate, do it. Mm-hmm. But give, because nobody can support the institution as you can. Mm-hmm. Nobody. Other people have other institutions. You have this one. This is ours. Support it, please.
I could not agree more, Dr. Moses, especially in this time of political divide, the nation being divided, and people like to frame things in black or white terms, and we got to make sure that institutions like Meharry can survive and continuing their missions is really important. But we can't do that without support.
We must. And the institution has to survive, because who knows what's going to happen in this country 5, 10, or 15 years from now. Who knows? But one thing we can be certain, if we support institutions like Maha, like Fisk, like Morehouse, like Spelman, like Xavier, we'll be okay.
I think so. Thank you, Dr. Moses. Really appreciate it.
And thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening to Public Service Announcement. To follow along on the rest of our journey, visit www.mmc.edu. And please remember to follow, rate, and review this show wherever you get your podcasts.